I'm Carol Gordon, and I am a keeper of our ancestors' spirits.
You made me cry because you said goodbye, and tears from my eyes made me so realize how good, and I just can't go on without you. Maybe you found a new refrain. If it's true, I don't know what I'll do. I need romance. So give me one more chance. I pray for the day that I'll say you say you do.
How all of this began.
It all began, I worked 3 jobs. I worked at Department of Veterans Affairs, patient advocate, Sears, and in seasonal time, I worked at the post office. So I was around the clock going, raising 3 kids. I would come home, make the dinner for the night before and stuff like that. I would throw always big barbecues for the families, come to my house, picnics, 4th of July, Memorial Day, you name it. I was the host for
You're the
everybody.
host.
My uncle came out one time and he had told me he admired my work ethics, how I keep on going, keep striving. And he gave me 3 pieces. He gave me that Josephine Baker
This
poster
picture right behind you.
and a cookie jar and a string holder, and told me anything I saw to start collecting it because soon it will become a thing of the past. With the civil rights, the 60s, as time kept progressing on, people don't want to hear about the history. They didn't care about it. They would keep it hidden, put away. And that's what I started doing. I would take my kids to antique shows, garage sales, you name it. And my mother loved antiques. I mean, my house is almost probably designed the way I grew up. My mother's house is old like this,
Wow.
So I would take her, and my mother would see certain things, like if it was hand crocheted, and if it was for $4, she said, "Get it hand crocheted." And I was like, "What do I care?" You know what I mean? But then I would start, tuning my eye on certain. A lot of vendors didn't have a lot of black stuff out because I guess they was ashamed to put it out. And if they were selling, it was almost like people selling the Jewish stuff, the Holocaust stuff, and they didn't want no parts of it.
Why do you feel like they were ashamed?
Because it's almost like showing of a bitter past, a brutal part of history that maybe they know that it shouldn't happen, and if they could prevent it or change it, they would do it, but they didn't. And they couldn't because they're in another era then. I started asking different vendors and whatnot, and they said, "Oh, yes, I do." And then the next following week they would have it, and after a while they got used to me coming in. When they see me, they would go like that, like, I got something. They would pull it from the table. And then at that time, they said, "I would rather sell it to you than someone else who's going to sell it for a higher profit." As time went on, my kids got trained what to look for. They would spread out like marbles when we go into the thing. And they knew what I was looking for.
Right.
And they would go to different vendors, and they would be sitting there waiting. And they said, "Oh, I would like to meet the lady who wants to spend $25 for this $250 piece." You know what I mean? He said, "But your son tried to bargain me down to $25. You know what I mean? But they knew how to bargain. It taught them a lot. And I remember one time my son was going to buy an old tin car, and the man explained the history with the metal during World War II, how they pulled the metal and the tin for the military and stuff like that. And he was so interested in it, but he was learning history on top
the
of
same
it.
time.
So when I started getting my pieces and collection, I would ask the history, I would look it up, I would view about it, I would read up on it. My kids would be my audience, my capture audience. After I brought a piece home, they would say, "What are we eating for dinner tonight?" And I said, "Franks and beans, but look what I got," you know what I mean? And I would tell the history of it, and they would bring their friends over. And a lot of teenagers, boys, there must have been about 16, 12 at that time. They would come over all the time, and I would say, "Oh, okay," and I would bring out a piece, and they would say, "No," you know what I mean? They would say, like, "Anthony, there goes your mother again," or "Rob," But they sat there and listened. And as they got a little older, they kept saying, my name at that time was Mrs. Holmes. And Mrs. Holmes, we got something you don't have nowhere in your collection. I was saying, what these boys got? And they, one of the kids pulled a thing out of a brown bag, and it was a black bottle called El Negron. So they thought of the Negro or something like that. I was saying,
no.
wow, that means they really paid attention to me. Even though they mimicked and joked around, they really paid attention because I could see them drinking this wine, laughing. I bet your mother don't have this, you know what I mean? And they all came like they would give me a gift, you know what I mean? So I still have the bottle up on top of the cabinet in the other room, just as a memento, you know, that they. I didn't think they paid attention to me, but they really did.
Yes. So as you begin to educate yourself more and more on these artifacts, how did this make you feel?
It feels great. I feel like I'm giving a voice to the ancestors, whereas some people stifle it, throw it in the garbage, don't want to hear about it. I keep speaking it out, like the keeper of the ancestors. No matter how derogatory, how hurtful it may appear or seem, I'm still a keeper of the history, and to keep it going so people know about it. They need to know. They need to be educated.
Rather than hiding this history, because you know some people these days, they don't want their children to know about their past.
Right.
Why do you think that is?
I think because they're not educated enough to know that the past is where you're standing on their shoulders. You didn't get here. If it wasn't for them, you wouldn't be here. So if they were educated more, and a lot of strong people survived that. You couldn't survive doing all the inventions, doing a road map to get up north, hiding. I mean, you had the guy who put himself in the, Henry Stiller put himself in the box. I mean, just the madness, the craziness of all the inventions is unbelievable. And we didn't invent it to be inventors. We were inventing stuff to make our lives easier. Let me do the iron so I make the clothes look pressed and stuff like that. But just the things that we've done is just mind-boggling. As time goes on, you can see they're still finding more things out of our history. I mean, if you ever saw the Richard Pryor thing with the three men, Richard Pryor and who's that guy, Gene? Who's the one that always plays in Richard Pryor movies with him? Gene Wilder, right? Him and another guy. They were in some place it looked like it could be a pyramid, and they were going in this hunt and whatnot. And they came into the cave, and they went into the cave, and they had the light on and whatnot. And then Richard Pryor said, "Whoa, my goodness! Look at these books! We invented this! We did this! We did that!" And meanwhile, you see Gene Wilder and the other guy backing up backwards, and then they push the big rock closed, and he's in there saying, wait a minute, how did I get this out? But it was already too late. He closed them up, and that's almost how I perceive like our history is. Yeah, so.
You have about how many total artifacts in your home?
I don't know. I cataloged it. My son was killed. I stopped cataloging. I asked my grandchildren to catalog. They did a couple. They don't end up catalog. They end up reading the book. You know what I mean? Oh, Grandma, you had this. You know what I mean? And next that goes to that. So I have to sit down and just see. I mean, it's everywhere. I have a old house, and every floor is filled up with something.
My condolences about your son.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I would say thousands.
Oh yeah, more than that.
More than that?
Yes.
You have some things with us here. Do you want to tell me about the artifacts on the floor here?
Well, I bought, this is like a small part of like a slavery exhibit. I started collecting when I saw Danny Drain, who has a museum down in South Carolina, and that was his passion to open up a slavery museum. I mean, he has the bed, he has different things, and I got a couple pieces from him. And the other guy is Gene Peters, who has a collection. He does exhibits, Sankofa exhibit, and he's also the chairman at the Schomburg. So I'm like in their little clique there. I mean, we sell to each other. There's quite a few people out there who sell stuff. When I first started, there was very few people that I knew of African American culture who actually started saving this stuff. As I, started growing and started doing things, and more people came to my home. like they say, oh, my cousins are here from, Thanksgiving, would you mind? And when every holiday came, in addition to have my family here, I was showing my home to different people. And then that's when I started, had my kids come up with a name for my passion for my collection. And I call it Unspoken History Treasures because it's not talked about.
Right.
It's history, and it's a beautiful treasure. So my kids came up with that name. And as time went on, I started collecting, and I tried to get something of every era, every piece that I can get. If it's like records, I want to get the best record. If it's a book, I want to get the oldest book in certain books, you know what I mean? If it's a doll, I want to get the old. I went everywhere. It was coin, money, things that people didn't even know about. Stamps, postage stamps. I mean, they had stamps of Malcolm X in other countries before it even came here. So it's just the idea. I try to do my best, and my kids, if they see things, they call me. If they're down in other states, they would get it for me and then get it, bring it back. So this here is, like I said, it's my slavery collection.
Okay.
And that's most popular in middle schools now.
Hold it up.
Middle schools now because, the colonial era, you know what I mean? And they talk about slavery a little bit and then they go on. But when I take my collection there, it's more like hands-on. I let the kids actually hold it. I had some youth hold the shackles, and tears would come down our eyes. And I said, what's the matter? She said, I can almost feel the person who wore this strength, passion and whatnot. I mean, I was saying like, wow, So this here is like a slave collar, and it would go around your neck. And I'm not going to put it. Oh, I can't put it around my neck. And then they would have another chain, that gets to pull him almost like a dog, or he could have the shackles on his hands with a chain. And if you could feel how cold it is, I mean, I have them different sizes, different lengths, different things. This one just happens to have African design on it. So since we did all the work, he put a African type design in it, which is I thought was unique. I have some with just a plain piece of thin metal, or little round circles and stuff like that, and some with little spikes on it, stuff like that.
What do you think it means?
I have no idea. I'm looking at it and I'm thinking of the positive thing, like he's wishing whoever wears this much strength, peace, not too much pain, not too much sorrow. Because wearing something like this and chained to another person, if you have a long line of people that are enslaved, chained to another chain is called a coffle. Like you have a gaggle of geese, so it's a coffle of people that are enslaved. I make sure that the kids and people I speak to, instead of saying slavery all the time, I say enslaved. Because you had kings and queens that were captured over there, brought here to be enslaved. You didn't just have slaves coming here, you know what I mean? So I always say it's enslaved, so that's the terminology I use.
Whew. That's actually heavy. Tell us about this next piece.
Which one? This one here? Yes. All right, this is called the crab-shaped rattler. As you can hear, the rattle, the beads in it. And the purpose of this, they said they would torch this open, put it on the ankle or the arm, or I have one that's bigger, one around the neck. And when they torched it open, this would be red hot. They would open it up, and when they open it up, they would put it on your hand. And if the red hot burnt your arm or the flesh, they didn't care because you're being punished anyway. This is for runaway slaves. They would put this on them, and the slightest noise, since dogs at that time probably had supersonic hearing, they would hear and pick this up and then capture the person that tried to run away. As time went on, since we are such ingenious thinking people, they started packing it with mud. And when you pack it with mud, it muffles the sound, and they stopped making this particular type. And they went on to make other types, like with spikes and stuff like that. So, or bells. They had one with a long spike on it with bells on it. So when you just moved your head a little bit, the bells were tingling. So different types, different styles. This one here is just an old one I just showed to see how it's carved out, and the seeds would be in there like that. So.
And then you have, is this a
Brandon iron.
thing? I figured, what's the symbol on the end?
It could be the JC. When you came off the boat, JC could be name of the boat, John, Charles, or something like that. And they would brand you, depending if that boat was branding everybody. Then you were auctioned off, and the new owners got you. They would brand you again. And then they would brand you on your arm, your back, your thigh, your hip, anywhere possible. I have a newspaper article in there, and the young man's name is Wilson Chin. Wilson Chin had his master brand his initials in his forehead. So reading the article, they said he had something like it's VML, Vandermill, something like that. But the man had something like 80 slaves, and so many slaves, were men, so many were children. As looking at this man in the picture, he's so big and tall. I think he branded the name, his initials on their forehead to show the people in town that he had the best lot of men going. So looking at the Harper's Weekly is just like the touching. And looking at the books nowadays, you could see the books. You could see this man, Wilson Chin, in a lot of the things on the face. I mean, when you Google it. But if you don't pay attention to his forehead, you would never know he was engraved. And nobody really pulls it out. I stumbled upon it reading the Harper's Weekly. So a lot of history is in the newspapers. You ever see that gentleman with the guy whose back was all whipped?
Which one?
Gordon. You ever see when you Google people that was enslaved, or if they were whipped, his back had all keloids and design on it, like, well, he didn't have a first name. His name was Gordon.
Gotcha. That's why.
Gordon was whipped and beaten so many times because he was a runaway slave. He ended up with all these keloids and whelps on his back. He finally got away by putting onions all over his hands, all over his body, put pieces of onions, cut them in his pocket. He finally escaped. You can see in another picture in Harper's Weekly, whereas he looked like a bum. And then upon going into the United States Colored Troops, when they did a medical examination of him, when they had him turned, there was 2 well-known photographers who took his picture. With that, it showed how the horrors of slavery really was. He ended up going into the army, was captured one time by the Confederates, got out again, and he ended up being a captain. But then after that, you don't hear anything about him, what happened to him, or anything. So I should have brought some newspapers out here to show you.
Oh, we can take a look at some of it. You can just feel the weight of this. This is made out of cast iron.
Yes.
It just goes to show you the amount of money and time that went into
this.
making these.
To show your property, you know what I mean? This is my property, and when you look, and if you're a runaway slave, sometimes they would identify in some of the articles. He has my initials on his arm, SQ or something like that, or you can identify my slaves. I have another well-known plantation master, whoever you want to call it, and he used to put his buttons with his initials on all his slaves' clothes. So he identified his slaves with the buttons in his clothes that way.
That would be kind of considered nice.
Yeah, well, it was very nice. Yes. These are like middle passage shackles. Like when you came over in the boats, this would be chained to either the boat or to another chain, And these I also have in all different sizes. Even though they used the children, they would tie them up with leather restraints. Sometimes they would put chains on them. And the only reason why they would put chains on them if they separated them from their parents. So fast forwarding to the history nowadays, they're talking about the immigrants that are coming here, and what did they do? They separated the kids from the parents. So it's history repeating itself in other forms of areas
modern.
in life, right? Modern history.
Mm-hmm.
So this would slide off. You put your feet in here or your hands, and then the hull of the ship is like 2 feet by 1 feet, and you had to either lay sideways, spooning, behind each other like that, and wherever you laid, if you went to the bathroom, threw up your food, wherever it is, that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
They had no place to go, and I had these in different weights.
And different
And I guess for the
size, even for
stronger men,
kids.
right, and bigger gaps like that. And this here, I don't have the key for this. And this would be like slave shackles.
Do you hear that sound?
Yeah, I gotten used to it,
Yeah.
And you would put your hand into here.
You want me to? Oh, there's like a little hook there.
Hook there, and this will be chained to another chain, like that. And this just came apart, and they said that sometimes they would be chained so tight to strength around your arm. I have some that are flat. This happens to be rounded. They said the purpose of it being rounded was to let air go in, because if it was flat and left on the person's wrist for a long time, maggots would form underneath.
Oh, wow.
So they have different reasons why they made things. So this would rock, and you would get some air in there. So, I mean, I had young kids saying, I would have break out of this and ran, and they would go like this. And that's why I think why this came apart. But it would never happen, So, and also I have in the branding thing, I have one abolitionist. His name is called Jonathan Walker. Jonathan Walker was a white man, but he was an abolitionist. He was up north, went down south, and didn't like how they treated the slaves. He decided to go back up north, and some of his people that was enslaved wanted to go with him. He said, jump in the boat. He tried to steer the boat off the coast of going up Florida, going up. But he must have tuberculosis or something like that. He was very sick at the time. The boat captured, they captured him again in Florida, took him and threw him in the dungeon with the people that was enslaved, killed them, left him down there. And since he was a white man, I guess they figured they'd give him a little break. But they took him and put him in the cell like that. They took the branding iron and branded his hand with SS. SS meant slave stealer. So he was known, Jonathan Walker, his story is the man with the branded hand, and the SS meant slave stealer. He went back up north, New York, with Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, all them, everybody rallied together to help the people. And then when he finally died in his hometown, I have a picture of his the tomb thing on top of the thing. One of the famous poets wrote a letter, a poem about him, and on the tomb, it has a picture of his hand with SS on it as a dedication for the freedom and helping the people.
Wow.
So like I said, there's so much history that nobody knows about. I mean, every day I go pick up a book and look something, I say, wow, that's new. And the things and the thoughts that you would never think about, like I was telling Sean, the gentleman who, Elijah McCoy, who did the oil, who invented the oil for the engines and stuff like that. The term, or the cliche, the real McCoy, that came from him, because people would say the texture and the consistency of the thickness of the oil, if that wasn't the right one, people would say that's not the real McCoy. So a lot of the terminology came from things that we have done and we actually part of. I think I showed you all. This is another brand, right? I showed you all that.
You have a couple of things here on your table. I want to know more about this item here, the
Stereo bill.
The stereo bill, yes. What year, around what time
This is about the 1900s. This one's about the 1900s, a little earlier than that. I have cards of all different types of people, whether they're picking cotton, kissing each other, like little poetry thing. And you would put the card in here. You would look through here, and you would move it, you know, forward and back. And when you look through here, it looks three-dimensional. So this is like a little pastime, like, you know, the round
like
circle one. What's the round circle one called?
It's like a
Viewmaster.
Yes,
Yes. So this is like a before the Viewmaster, you
the
know.
original.
Yes, right, the original. So when you look through it, it's three-dimensional. And
Yes.
then I leave it on the table so my grandkids can get a kick out of it, you know. So, and my grandkids and kids seeing this stuff so much they don't touch anything.
Yeah.
I have to worry about other people's kids, you know what I mean?
Because
So,
it's really valuable.
yeah. Well, you know what? When people ask me valuable, it's valuable who really knows the history about it, what's important, why, when. Other people come here and they would like to take the stereo or the TV, you know, but it's valuable to me because the history, the importance of our ancestors, I have to keep that going and make people more aware of what's really going on. Look at history, it repeats itself. Like I said, it's just happening now all over again. Even when you have the brutalities with the police department or something like that, it's almost like a modern day of the bird catchers trying to get the people who ran away, you know. So you would have the patrols going out. That's when the slave codes came about. You'd have the patrols going out to get the people, and then they came up with these slave codes and make sure nobody went anywhere. So if you were caught standing in the fair, in the square with 3 people, you would be sent, given 50 lashes because they thought you were creating a mutiny to overtake everything. A lot of the stories that I have read in Harper's Weekly and old newspapers, I mean, there was many ships that were overtaken by the people. The people killed everybody in the ship like that. But you see it in a little tiny square in the thing. But then when they want to add for my runaway slave, the ad is like that big, you know. So with the old cliche, they say it depends on whether the lion tells the story or the gazelle tells the story, you know.
Your perspective.
Yes, right. Whoever was the winner and the hero tells the story, you know. So looking at a lot of the old newspapers, it's just unbelievable that the things that you could find and still see.
And for you, that is just so important for people to understand, most importantly, African Americans to understand their history.
History, right. As I said, I don't understand because when the Jewish do their history, I mean, they're on it. I mean, like I said, they have many museums, and museums up before our museum in Washington. So it makes me wonder if anybody, if they don't want us to know our history, or does anybody really care about our history? But since that new museum has gone up, a lot of people are more interested in our history.
Because it has essentially been erased. I mean, schools isn't in books.
Right now, even in the social studies curriculum, they're cutting out more on in slavery now. So history has changed, and pretty soon you won't even have the Native American Indians in there. And they talk about the Native American Indians. A lot of them were mixed up with the people that were enslaved. I mean, history goes way back, you know. So it's just mind-boggling.
Do you want to show me some more artifacts that you have?
I can show you some more. I can go over to the cabinet.
I do.
You made me cry because you said goodbye, and tears from my eyes made me so realize how good, and I just can't go on without you. Maybe you found a new refrain true.